It was a Tuesday, and it should have been just like any other Tuesday. But it was the Tuesday that we remember now as being the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. Tuesday, June 6, 1944, was the day that Allied forces conducted the opposed amphibious landing operation that we now know as Operation Overlord and Neptune, during which approximately 150,000 Allied personnel invaded the Normandy region of France, either by sea or by air. The panel that you see before you is among the most distinguished veterans of the Normandy campaign that you're ever going to see. 5 Americans and 1 German. The way that this panel is going to be structured is that I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and then we're going to hear from each one by one, and then maybe, and that's maybe with a high probability of not, some question and answer at the end. I just want to give you a realistic picture of what's probably going to happen. At any rate, to begin with, seated immediately next to the podium is Mr. John Pellegren, who on D-Day was in the 467th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Automatic Weapons Battalion, landed at the Easy Red sector of Omaha Beach in front of the WN-65 bunker, and was instrumental in knocking out that bunker. Next to him is Joachim Hoene, who was serving with the Luftwaffe far away from D-Day, far away from Normandy, in Dortmund, Westphalia in Germany, as a Flakhelfer, and subsequently went on to become a German Messerschmitt 163 rocket pilot. Next to Herr Hoene is Don Malarkey, who served in E Company 506 Parachute Infantry 101st Airborne Division, the Band of Brothers. Had to sit the paratroopers next to each other, so next to Mr. Malarkey is a representative of the other division that landed in Normandy, Col Roy Creek, who commanded E Company of the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. Next to Colonel Creek is Dr. Harold Baumgarten, who served in B Company 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, and landed in front of the Dog Green sector at Vierville on D-Day, Omaha Beach. It's such a cliche. Last but not least, it's Mr. Walter Ehlers, served in the 18th Infantry Regiment, 1st Division, the Big Red One, landed at Omaha Beach, continued to fight in Normandy for 3 days until on June 9th and 10th at a place called Gauville, France. He earned the Medal of Honor. Okay, let's get underway. Now, to begin with, we're going to start right here next to me with John Pellegren. Mr. Pellegren, please tell us a little bit about the 467th Anti-Aircraft Automatic Weapons Battalion, and please tell me a little bit about what you went through on D-Day.
Well, the 467th was attached to the famous 29th Division of Saving Private Ryan, was the well-known 29th Division. The 467th, well, we had half-tracks. And for some people who don't know what a half-track looks like, it's a little, it happened to be one of the major items on Omaha Beach that morning at Dog Green and Easy Red. I found out that Harold and I were, just a few days ago, were only about 150 yards away from each other on that morning, on D-Day. But I want to mention one thing, and that's the untold stories about the 467th. I have about 50 books written since President Reagan told us to, in 1984, told us to get out of the woodwork because we're all going to be gone here pretty soon. That was 1984. We kind of fooled them. We're still around. And, but that was the beginning, I think, of the movement of D-Day. And then we took a cue from the autobiography of our General Omar Bradley, who called in his autobiography, "Every man on Omaha Beach was a hero." Page 23 in his autobiography. And that, I think, started people like, Tom Hanks and those people start thinking about making movies of D-Day, and that's the movement, I think, that started mid-'80s and into the '90s, the glorification of D-Day, the greatest battle in the 20th century, the one-day battle. I'm not going to take any credit away from the Pacific, but the greatest one-day battle of the 20th century was D-Day, June 6, 1944. And that was, I think President Reagan helped to glorify that. And my first experience was, I went back to the 40th anniversary. Before that, I had intentionally forgotten the 40 years after 40 years, I just wanted to forget about the war and raise my family and lead a life. And but it was that time in 1984, June 6th, that I had a miraculous trip to Normandy with about less than 2 days' notice. My neighbor told me, "I better get over there before you're all gone. All you boys are getting old." And it was unbelievable trip. I ended up with a front row seat next to Secretary of State Schultz. And President Reagan was just a few feet in front of me. And it was just a great experience to get there at the 40th anniversary. And that began my quest for trying to read every book about D-Day from then on. I have somewhere around 50, 60 books, D-Day books. But I don't think any of them mention the 467th. And it was a great battalion. I joined the 467th as a replacement, probably one of the youngest people on that beach that day. And I joined the 467th at Camp Shanks, and then we went on a 13-day cruise to Liverpool in an English freighter and ate mutton every day. What a joyful cruise that was. We landed ended up in a small town called Gillingham, middle of England, and we stayed there for a few months and I remember the only thing about Gillingham had good fish and chips, good variation from our K rations and C rations. But getting back to the main issue, I'll have to bypass a few little interesting and humorous details. Let's get on with D-Day, because I think we have a limited time here. On June 1st, well, let me get back to one other thing. The Slapton Sands, that was kept secret for 30 years, what happened there. And Andy Rooney just touched on it briefly, but he didn't mention the real disaster that happened at Slapton Sands. 800 engineers lost their lives at Slapton Sands. It was an exercise. And the reason it was kept secret is the British let us down and didn't protect our flanks on that Slapton Sands beach. And how in the world it was kept secret for 30 years is beyond me, because the families of those 800 engineers should have, I don't know why they were not told what happened to their sons on Slapton Sands. But the significant thing there is that on D-Day, that morning, landed a little after 8:30, there were no engineers on that beach. And the hillside was mined with mines, and they were supposed to be there. And none of the books that I've read, the 50, 60 on D-Day, have ever said, you know, why didn't we have engineers to clean those mines that morning? They were all dead. They died at Slapton Sands. That's my opinion. And we should have seen not mines on that beach. We should have seen craters, bomb craters by our bombers, the USS Texas was out there 5 miles. Why didn't they blast that beach on Omaha Beach full of craters, not mines and pillboxes? I still haven't gotten an answer on that question. That should have, I don't know who missed the boat, but all the bombs went 5 miles inland. Didn't do us any good. So we were stuck on that beach at the edge of the hillside because of the minefields. Our warrant officer said, well, I don't want you to go up that hill. There's enough being killed on the water. I want you to stay here and help the wounded, because our medics had been killed. 2 medics were killed out there in the water. And I just want to interject a little bit about the 467th. On that morning, killed in action, Tom Chavez from Denver, Colorado, Tech Sergeant DePaulo from Frederick, Colorado, Tech Sergeant Placindo Quinones, Denver, Colorado. You can imagine I usually give this speech in Colorado, and next is the Silver Star was given to 2 Coloradans from Cripple Creek. They were expert swimmers. I don't know where they learned how to swim in Cripple Creek. It's always so cold, but they were our best swimmers, and they went out in the water that morning about noon and rescued 15, each of them rescued 15 of your fellow soldiers from the 29th Division. And they received the Silver Star for that. Then there were a number of Purple Heart people from Colorado. My good friend Dal Estes was there, and from far country of Illinois, Pontiac, Illinois, and he was there, and some of his crew were badly wounded. He was a good friend of mine. We had a great time at the grand opening of the museum, and I miss him very much. But getting back to some of the real things that we did, after this happened, about noon, we couldn't go up the hill. Our soldiers went out in the water to do the best they could without medics. and we helped because there were no medics available. One of my good, not friends, but sergeant that helped me so much that morning, he was hit badly right next to me, Sergeant Milburn. He was a big man, made a big target, unfortunately, and we didn't know what happened to him, but he went in the hospital for 2.5 years from that wound of that day. And we found out just about a year ago from a TV station that found out what happened to him. He ended up in a farm in Indiana and raised a beautiful family. So it took us 60 years to find out what happened to Sergeant Milburn. Let me get on with this because I don't want to take any more time than I should. But of course, that afternoon, Sergeant Haas, High Haas, he finally was frustrated with not being able to go over the hill, and he backed his half-track into the water and knocked out the last pillbox about 4 o'clock that afternoon. And he should have gotten a Silver Star or something, but he never got a medal of any kind. And so today there's a big plaque. If you ever go to Normandy, you'll see our plaque of our now famous 467th, formerly unknown 467th. About an hour later, a few engineers finally showed up. Should have been there all day long, and created a path leading up to the present cemetery, and put a white tape so we could avoid the mines. And to this, when I went back for the 40th, I had a funny feeling that I had been there before. But we went up the hill. This must have been about 5 o'clock. And the lieutenant told us to dig a foxhole in as best you could. We dug two shovels full and collapsed. We had been on the water, seasick, for 5 days and 5 nights. The most miserable 5 days I've spent in my lifetime. That is D-Day, basically, for me. I'm trying to forget a few of the humors, but one thing, us hillbillies, Sergeant Harmon, he volunteered to go out and get a radio that we needed badly to find out where the rest of the battalion landed. So Lieutenant Lang asked him for volunteers, asked all of them volunteers, and Harmon did volunteer. He went out and got the radio, but the reason he volunteered, he had a guitar in the back of his half-track, so he really risked his life just to bring back a guitar. So that tells you some of the great characters we had in our battalion. After D+1, we finally regrouped in the orchard, which is now a cemetery, and we blasted away at all the snipers. Our .450 caliber guns really shot them to smithereens, so to speak. D+2, I finally got to do my job as a scout. With Major Weatherall, we went through the tunnels and pillboxes to make sure there were no Germans behind us, and there were a few civilians that had to be cleared out. And because I had 2 years of French in high school, I was selected to do that job. From then on, we spent the next 7 weeks in the hedgerows, and it was fairly dormant, but we would take care of the few planes that come over every night. And then the really important thing that happened with the 467th, we were asked by General Patton to join his outfit because we had a pretty good record on D-Day. And so we were selected to go at St. Lo. Andy didn't mention what happened at St. Lo, but we were, well, I guess we settled a lot closer to the front lines than normal for our half-tracks, ready to move ahead because Patton wanted to go, and we had wheels, and so we were selected to go close. But that morning, 3,000 planes came over. It was a beautiful day to start with. It turned out to be a gray, dreadful day because one squadron dropped their whole load on top of our battalion. We lost many of our best men that day, but I was fortunate the day before. The weather at that time was quite good, ready for the big push. I dug deeper than usual foxhole, so when I dove in, I didn't get hit. I was very lucky and fortunate not to get hit on that day. But as General Patton was our leader now, and I disagreed with Andy a little bit. Patton, we respected Patton. If he had his way, we would have ended the war 3 months earlier. We wouldn't have had the problem giving Montgomery the gas. He should have had the gas, so we could have kept going, because in 1 month we were in Prague, another month we were at the Luxembourg, and just ran out of gas, and he gave it to Montgomery, who didn't know how to properly run an army, but Patton did. We respected Patton. We spent the rest of the war with Patton. We protected Patton around Luxembourg because he was paranoid about the V-1 and V-2 bombs, so he selected our battalion to circle Luxembourg and protect him. And then, I don't know, I'll try to wrap it up here. I think there's better leave time for these fellas. The last two significant things that the now famous 467th did, we were told by Patton had promised Eisenhower that in 48 hours he would be up to Bastogne from Luxembourg. Come hell or high water, he said he'll be there. And so we were selected to join the 4th Armored Division. In 48 hours, we had was some coffee once in a while, nothing to eat, hardly any sleep, but we got there in 48 hours and opened the gap, the southern gap of Bastogne, and freed the airborne division there. On some conferences, then the last significant thing is, after the Battle of the Bulge, I went on, started doing my projected job as a scout. I went on a weapons carrier with a sergeant, and we went along the rivers scouting around, and we were one of the first to spot the Remagen Bridge. And because we had a powerful radio on a weapons carrier, I don't know if we were the first, but we were in the early stages to report it immediately that here's the bridge still intact. And it probably saved 2 or 3 weeks to end the war that sooner. The fact that we had that bridge intact and 2 or 3 divisions were able to get across in the next few days. And we protected that bridge with our that was a significant thing that our battalion did, to protect that bridge that long to allow that much infantry to go across. And that was the last really significant. From then on, we'd see streams of prisoners. We'd go 50 miles. We could have gone to Berlin, but politics had us stop every 50 miles so the Russians could take Berlin. But we would stop every other day, but prisoners walking back. And we ended up in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, and the brewery was still running. That was VE Day. That's my story.
Well, thank you very much for that account, Mr. Pellegren. And it's interesting to note you have this one battalion that hits some of the highest points of the war in Europe. They're on Omaha Beach on D-Day. They are at St. Lo. They are moving into Bastogne at the end of the Battle of the Bulge, and then crossing the Rhine River and end in Czechoslovakia. And it's interesting to note also that the 467th Anti-Aircraft Automatic Weapons Battalion earned its fame, for the most part, on Omaha Beach, not doing what it was designed to do. That battalion, using half-tracks like that one right there, although equipped with quad 50 caliber machine guns, the battalion's job was to shoot down enemy aircraft. And what that battalion ends up doing on Omaha Beach on D-Day is taking out one of the most difficult pillboxes that was located there. There are a few people here today that were with me on Omaha Beach on June 6th of this year, and you might remember I dragged you to that pillbox on purpose and made you stand in front of Mr. Pellegrin's sign. And if you remember that, it said the WN65 bunker and the Widerstandsnest 65 bunker, a bunker that could not be knocked out. But half-tracks from this man's battalion backed off into the surf and laid their fire directly on that bunker and knocked it out and opened up Omaha Beach. And I think that deserves a round of applause right there. Well, about 250 miles away from Omaha Beach in Dortmund, Westphalia, Joachim Hoene was working in Flakabteilung. He was an anti-aircraft gunner, and he had an interesting experience on June 6th that he's going to share with you now. Herr Hoene, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joachim Hoene. Since I met the first American, he couldn't say Joachim, so I was dubbed Joe. And I've been Joe ever since, and my crew always, I made sure they called me Mr. Joe. So, anyway, I grew up in a medieval town in Germany where you have all your fairy tales from the Brother Grimm's, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I was always, as a boy, horsing around in those old castles and towers and try to find a little, maybe some gold or something, but I never found anything. I grew up on an air base, and Hermann Göring had the bright idea to put a big air base in the valley in Fritzlar. My dad became the commander of that air base. I was his only son, and I had free run. I was flying with every airplane whenever I could hitch a ride with a Heinkel or Junkers 52 or whatever there was to be. I could sneak in, I was flying with him. So my love for airplanes started mighty young, and he took me along. He had a sport plane, but he did aerobatics with me, and I sure didn't like it. I about fell out of the damn thing. So, anyway, but flying was all my life and still is today. I used my airplanes here to cover my workload I had. Building airports and interstate highways. But that's just a side. We were drafted from high school, and I was barely 16 years old, drafted as in the aircraft helpers. They call them flak helpers. Now, I'd like to explain that word flak to you. In Germany, they love to make those mile-long words, you know, to express their ideas, and actually Flak is a Flugabwehrkanone, but that even was too long for us, for the Germans, so they called it a Flak. So anyway, we were stationed around Kassel. Kassel was then one of the major towns, and they built the Tiger tanks in there. and they had built Henschel airplanes in there. And anyway, they finally bombed Castle, and we got in a bad air raid. And believe me, friends, when you hear 1,000 Lancaster bombers coming at you at a pitch dark night, the whole ground and the heavens are shaking from the noise only. And you believe me, you shaking your boots too. And I was always glad when we can start firing our cannons. The 88 was a very sophisticated and developed anti-aircraft gun, but it didn't help it. One of the bombs hit too close to me, and it was just on D-Day, and busted my eardrum, and I ended up in a hospital. And I heard about all the news about D-Day in the hospital. Now, I met a nice little young lady. We had those candy strippers too. And I enjoyed my little stay in the hospital for about a week. But then I got discharged and had to go back to our gun. I was #1 gunner. I was operating the elevation of the barrel. But as things developed in the later years, I finally got fed up with the politics over there in Germany. After the war, I learned to trade as a bricklayer, and if you go over there as a field engineer, you have to have a trade, either carpenter or bricklayer or concrete finisher. I had to do all this after the war, which was, well, they needed us bad, because everything was bombed. So, but then I got fed up with them. Meanwhile, my mother and my dad divorced, and my uncle had to leave Germany under Hitler, because we were all staunch Catholics from Silesia, and he made some nasty remarks about Hitler, and so he had to leave and ended up in Houston as a professor, teaching in the University of Houston. So my mother went to Houston. After a while, my mother was bugging me, and I didn't want to go, and I really, but then I read as a young boy, I read Huckleberry Finn and this little Becky and all that stuff, and I knew that Tom Sawyer from one end to the next. I read it at least 10 times. So I fell in love with the Mississippi River. That's why I live in Baton Rouge, by the way. So anyway, I finally ended up, and I wasn't married then, but I was engaged to the daughter of my Latin teacher. As young ones, we had English was our first language, foreign language we had to learn when we were 10 years old, and we were reading already then Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book, and kind of a good English literature, and plus me, I dug up everything I could read, because in those days you had no television, you had no stupid radio, which always has propaganda and Wagner playing constantly. And I still don't like Wagner today, Anyways, I'm a music student also, and I love Mozart, by the way. So, I came here to the States, and then I got a job right away as a supervisor on building a bridge from Galveston to Pelican Island. I was just with my mother for about a day, and she lived in Houston, then with my uncle. And then I had to go to work, and there was no 48-hour work week for me, because they were pushing that bridge to do, and I had some sorry help. I tell you that it took me a while to get them all straightened out, and they didn't like. They called me all kind of names, and one name was a good crowd, they used to call me. But we all got drunk together one night and in Galveston in the bar, and became buddies, and then I had no more problems with them after that. So it was a resentment, and I understand that resentment, but I couldn't help it. It was fate put me there, so I made the best out of it. But I have one thing I get reminded daily of D-Day. One of those bombs were dropped awful close to my gun, We had a big ring wall, a dirt wall around our guns, but still it busted my eardrum. And they stuck me in the hospital for a week, and my eardrum is still busted. That's the right one, but the left one I got a little hearing aid. So every time my wife starts fussing on me a little bit, so I made the best out of it. I just turn her my right ear, and then she really gets mad because I can hear. So that I will remind it every day of my life from then on, that D-Day. And well, we both became, and my daughter, we all citizens, and it wasn't easy for us to be citizens. And a little joke about that, once we had to go to the judge for an interview, my daughter came in first, and she came out and grinning, she was happy. My wife got in there, and she came out in a little while. And then I was the last one to go in to talk to the federal judge. And we hit it off right away. He was a pilot, and I was a pilot, and man, we could spin some tales as pilots. And I didn't come out, from the judge. And my daughter was worried. You sure, she asked my mother, you sure he wasn't a war criminal? Meanwhile, we both, the judge and I, we had a good time. So we've been citizens for quite a while. My the daughter is an English teacher in Hammond. My wife is Eucharistic minister. I'm a Eucharistic minister in Denham Springs. I sing in the choirs. I still love music. And I personally tell you, Denham Springs, Baton Rouge area is the close to paradise as I ever get there. So.
Thank you, Herr Hoene. It's worthy to point out that he did a lot of flying toward the end of the war, and one of the things that he flew was the Messerschmitt 193, and if you know that aircraft, that was the infamous rocket plane, Messerschmitt rocket plane. And I should also point out, Mozart was an Austrian. Well, the next person we're going to talk to served in the 101st Airborne Division in E Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment on Malarkey. And Mr. Malarkey, sir, would you please tell us a little bit about what you experienced on Tuesday, June 6, 1944?
Me? This is a difficult format for me to be in here, hanging under that airplane. I got a voice of Irene up there talking to me and saying, "Don't think you're that skinny kid in New York in Paramount Theater. Second, I'll never smile again until I smile at you. I'll never laugh again until I speak." God. Anyway, we were flying out of Pottery, England, on the south coast of England, flying due west to be the first division to hit France in 1944 or whatever it was, and we were in the 1st and 2nd Battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry, flying out of Pottery, England, going due west along the coast of England, the Channel, at 10:30 at night, twilight time in England. We reached a place called Portland Bill, reminded me of Portland, Oregon. And when we hit that point, we swung south across the Channel, climbing to 1,500 feet, and eventually hit the west coast of the Cherbourg Peninsula. And as we got there, the planes started dropping down to 700 feet, and flying towards St. Marie-Église. We were to jump drop zone C, the closest drop zone there was to what they called the causeways coming off of Utah Beach. The only problem we had is that we didn't have any pathfinders ahead of us. They'd gone down the channel by a motor failure of the plane, and our pathfinders were floating around the channel. One of the pathfinders was a guy named Karl Fenstermacher from Pennsylvania. He's a German. And a destroyer came along, and he thought it was a German destroyer. And he started talking German, yelling German to him, thinking of protecting himself or something. They pulled these 18 guys onto the destroyer, and then they informed them they were on a British destroyer. But because Fenstermacher could talk to them in German, they thought they were spies. They put them in the brig. Kept them there for 2 days until they could verify that they were really Americans and they were supposed to be leading us into Normandy. And God almighty, that was something. But anyway, as we approached St. Marie Glisse, the planes had dropped down to 700 feet, supposed to maintain that altitude all the way to our drop zone, which we didn't have. It wasn't marked. But anyway, there was a lot of fire coming up out of St. Marie Glisse with anti-aircraft guns and machine guns and everything you could think about. And there were planes being shot down ahead of us. And the pilots were warned that they could not take evasive action at all. They had to maintain the altitude of 700 feet, maintain the speed or attain the speed of 110 miles an hour, and then drop these guys out. 18 men in each plane. There were the 81 C-47s carrying us in there. But without the drop zone and with heavy fire and whatnot, why, the planes took evasive action. You can't blame them for that. They were not only protecting the plane, they were protecting you that were in it. And then they dumped us out. They're out of my plane. Buck Compton was the platoon leader. There were only 3 of us together, Bill Garnier, Joe Toa, and I. And we spent the whole time together on the ground. And I landed in an elm tree. The canopy of the chute drifted over the tree, and I came down my back. My back hit the hedgerow, and the hedgerows have a lot of vegetation, so it was a very easy landing. Anyway, we headed toward the coast, joined a group of people from the 502nd Parachute Infantry that we'd run into, but there were only 3 of us out of our plane that were together. We headed east toward causeways 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, I forget what they were. Our objective was what it was. And on the way, I had the unique experience of a guy behind me yelling, "Where are y'all guys from?" Some prisoners were behind us, about 8 of them. This guy says, "Portland, Oregon." So I turned around, I walked back and saw this German sergeant. I said, "Who said that?" And he said, "I did." I said, "What do you mean you're from Portland, Oregon?" He said, I am. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I returned to Germany in when Hitler called return of all true Aryans in 1938. And he returned to Germany." And I said, "Well, where'd you work in Portland, Oregon?" He said, I worked for Schmidt Steel Company in Northwest Portland. There was a manufacturing naval stuff for naval ships and whatnot they're constructing. And anyways, I worked right across the street the summer of 1942 at a place called Monarch Forge and Machine Works. So we were just a block apart, but we weren't there at the same time. Anyway, I said, "Well, what do you think of yourself now?" He said, "I think I made a mistake." And they in a series of Band of Brothers, on D-Day, they have something in there that might make you think that a lieutenant named Spears walked up and gave him a cigarette and took him down. I don't know such a thing as that happened. He did do that later on, an attack on Carentan, France, and so that might have been booked into D-Day just for effect or something, but I really don't know what happened to him. And but as we got near causeways 2 and 3, while we ran into a fairly large group of jumpers from the 506, and we no sooner got there than a lieutenant named John Kelly, a boxer, came running up out of the road and in the bushes, and he said there's some field with 4 artillery pieces, and so Colonel Strayer called E Company up front. He didn't know that our company commander had been killed on the drop, all 18 guys in that plane. And anyway, he ordered E Company to attack this gun position. Dick Winters was the ranking officer there. Buck Compton was there, my platoon leader, who was the jump master of my plane. And there were 12 of us all together. That's enough of me. We made the attack on the guns. It's well documented what we did. And I don't want to say more about it.
Well, the assault that Mr. Malarkey is referring to there is the assault of 4 German 105mm guns at a place called Bricourt Manor, just immediately to the north of a little town called Saint-Méry-du-Mont, which was just inland from Utah Beach. The weapons were, when he attacked them, the weapons were firing on the U.S. Army 7th Corps as it was conducting the opposed landing on Utah Beach. And with a handful of men led by Dick Winters, Mr. Malarkey helped in silencing those guns and bringing a quiet to Utah Beach that had not been there before. That's worth of applause. The men from E Company 506 that participated in the assault on those guns were all decorated. Dick Winters was awarded with the Distinguished Service Cross. And Mr. Malarkey, what decoration did you receive for Bricourt Manor? What decoration were you given that day on D-Day?
Me?
Yeah, for Bricourt Manor.
This Bronze Star. Nothing big at all, period.
I don't know. Bronze Star gets a round of applause from me. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Malarkey. And keeping with the airborne theme, and I feel bad for making the two of them sit beneath the C-47. They've spent enough time jumping out of them. We'll now move on to Col Roy Creek, who at about the same time as the attack on Bricourt Manor was about 7 miles away from there, right near the Merderet River at a place called Chef du Pont. And Colonel Creek at the time was a young captain commanding E Company of the 507th Parachute Infantry 82nd Airborne Division. Colonel Creek, could you tell us about D-Day, please?
Thank you. Well, I graduated from college on May the 24th, 1940, with a degree in agriculture and a reserve commission as a second lieutenant of infantry. Little did I know how much influence on my life that second lieutenant of infantry commission was going to be, because I didn't take it that seriously when I got the commission. But I went to a land-grant college, and the first 2 years, ROTC is mandatory. All male students who pass the physical have to take ROTC. The next 2 years, advanced class, you apply for the course, and you get a commission in the reserve if you finish it successfully, and they pay you $9 a month, or that's what they were paying at that time. I'm sure it's gone up significantly since that time. But $9 a month was really the incentive that I had to apply and take that course, because $9 a month was a lot of money to me at that time. So when I graduated, I knew that in order to maintain that commission on the current and updated state, I had to go to a summer camp for 6 weeks once every 3 years. And I was footloose and fancy-free. I just graduated. I didn't have a job. So I thought it'd be a good idea for me to apply for that 6-week summer camp and get it out of the way, and I wouldn't have to worry about it for the next 3 years. So I applied, and I got orders to report to Fort Huachuca, Arizona for a 6-week summer camp. I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, went to the camp, left the camp after the 6 weeks were over, and drove back to my home, which was 525 miles away in eastern New Mexico. When I walked into the door, my mother said, and greeted my mother, she said, "You have a telegram here from the Department of the Army, and it looks like it's important." So I looked at the telegram, and it was indeed important. It was ordering me to 1 year's extended active duty with the 25th Infantry Division at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I'd just come from there. I barely had time to get back and report on time for my 1 year's extended active duty. I served that 1 year, went in to sign out, was signing out. The regimental executive officer came out and said, "Where the hell are you going, Lieutenant?" I said, "I'm going home. My year's up." He said, "You've just been extended indefinitely." I went home the next time 28 years later. So I went to Fort Huachuca, and I served a year and over. And after I'd been there about a year and a half, I received orders assigning me to the Philippine Islands. So I went home on leave, visited the family, was there visiting and saying my farewells and so forth prior to reporting to San Francisco to sail for the Philippine Islands. And a next door neighbor from my parents, about 3 miles down the road, came rushing in the house as we were having dinner and said, "Turn on your radio, we're at war." It was December the 7th. And here I got orders to the Philippine Islands, and we don't even know if there's going to be a Philippine Islands by the time I got there. So the announcement was that any military person who was away from his duty station should report immediately. Well, there's a question in my mind about where my duty station was. Was it back at Fort Huachuca, where I had departed and had no intention of returning to? Or was it in San Francisco at the port where I was supposed to report on the 13th of December for sailing to the Philippines? So I opted to go back to Fort Huachuca. So I got in my car and drove right back to Fort Huachuca to report it in. And they said, "Well, wait around and we'll try to get some clarification on what you should do." So I decided that I had to leave Fort Huachuca no later than the 10th of December in order to make it to San Francisco and sell my car for whatever I could get for it and sail. So the 10th came. I got up for an early departure, went over to the headquarters to sign out, and I signed out. And as I was backing my car out to depart, the adjutant came running out waving a piece of paper in his hand, and he said, "We just have a telegram here canceling your orders to the Philippines. You're staying here at Fort Huachuca." So I stayed there at Fort Huachuca. But I started assessing my situation, and I decided that I might as well resign myself to the fact that I was going to be serving in the armies for some time, because the clouds of war were thickening daily in Europe, and everyone was quite concerned about us being able to stay out of that war. And so I assessed my situation and asked myself really what I wanted to do in the Army, what I would get the most satisfaction of doing if we should go to war. And I decided that I wanted to be an infantry unit commander, a company commander. that was the level I thought I could achieve at my age and with my experience and the experience I would be able to attain prior to the time I would have to do it. So that's what I set my goals to do. But as the time wore on and I thought about it a little more, and a new concept and a new idea was flourishing, and that was the Airborne Division, the parachute troops. And I thought, that's where I want to be. I want to command a parachute infantry company. And that's where I wound up going. And I went through jump school and finished jump school and was assigned initially to Camp Decoy, Georgia, to the 501 Infantry Regiment. I went in there before I went to jump school. I had to go there. And the regimental commander greeted me by saying, you better not show yourself around here without a parachute qualification. If you have, first question he asked me, how many jumps you have? And I said, none. So he said, we're going to get you assigned to the parachute school at Fort Benning so you can be qualified as a jumper. So I stayed there for a week and got orders to go to Benning, and I went through the jump training and graduated and was subsequently assigned to the 507 Parachute Infantry Regiment at Alliance, Nebraska. And I reported for duty there and was assigned to command of E Company, 507. I had achieved my goal. That's what I wanted to do, and that's what my assignment was. And we were alerted almost immediately after I arrived there for overseas shipment, but we didn't actually ship out 6 months later. But we finally sailed on around the 1st of December on the SSS Strathnaver, a converted British luxury ship. Was far from being a luxury ship when we rode it, with people sleeping on the floor and all over the place to fill the ship up. And we sailed in the Strathnaver, and we were in a big column of other ships that you could stand out on the deck and hold on to something, and the seas were very rough. It was very cold the month of December. We wound up subsequently assigned to North Ireland. We were taken there for a place to stay, and we went to a place called Portrush, North Ireland, and we were assigned billets in old hotels. It's kind of a resort town, a beautiful town in North Ireland, right up on the North Sea. But the weather there is horrible. There's hardly a suitable place for an airborne infantry regiment to train for an invasion. So it's cold, wet days, and wet, cold all the time, raining, very little training. We spent most of our time training in such things as aircraft identification. I think every man in the regiment became a real expert in identifying any kind of an aircraft. We were out, to give you an example of how proficient they really were. We were out on a road march one day, and I was marching along at the end of the company with my battalion commander, Colonel Timmis, and a plane flew over. And he said, hey, there's the Liberator, you know. And I said, no, it's not a Liberator. That's a Lancaster. It's a British bomber. They're somewhat similar, but that's the Lancaster. It's not a Liberator. Well, I'll bet you a Guinness beer that that's the Liberator. And I said, okay, I'll ask one of my real experts in the company to be the judge, and we'll take his word for it. Okay. So I called up the column, and I saw a person I thought I'd ask the question to, and I said, hey, Fitzpatrick, what is that? And he looked around at me in disbelief. He said, well, sir, that's an airplane. So much for our training in North Ireland. We stayed there about 3 months, and we were moved to the Midlands with other elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, the Midlands of England. We were put in a tent camp near Nottingham, and there we stayed until we were alerted to go to the marshaling areas for briefings and for preparation to go to Normandy. So we knew where we were going. We had some training up there. We had a few practice jumps. We always made them at night, and we were always practicing our assembly procedures and things like that that were so important. And we felt like we were really ready to go. And we were alerted, late May, and we would put on buses. We had our bundles all packed and ready to go to hang on the aircraft to take the things in that we couldn't carry with us. And we hauled all the bundles out, and we went to the marshaling areas that were sealed, and we were put in there, and nobody could get in or get out. And we had detailed briefings for several days there, and every man knew all he could know about where he was going and what he was supposed to do when he got there. Very detailed briefings, very detailed planning, and everyone was very attentive in learning exactly what they needed to know in order to do the job when they got to Normandy. So finally the day came, and we got all set to go. Then we got the alert that the invasion had been delayed because of bad weather for a day, and that took a little starch out of our ego, and we sat around for another 24 hours, and then we boarded aircraft and flew to Normandy. As we crossed into Normandy, first hit landfall over west of Briquebec, a town called Briquebec. We started straight for our objective area and our drop zones. We got there, as we approached Briquebec, we started getting a lot of anti-aircraft fire. And I was standing in the door as a jump master of aircraft I was in. I had hooked up and was standing in the door to watch the fireworks, and watching these tracer ammunition, the bullets being fired, and it looked like every one was coming straight to your airplane. It was just a line. And as they got there, of course, they'd go away, and fortunately none of them hit the aircraft I was in, though some aircraft were hit. Several aircraft, I'm sure, were shot down. But we made it in there unscathed. But we got into the drop area, and we were in and out of clouds. Visibility was poor, and aircraft fire was pretty heavy in the drop zone. And the formations that we were flying in, a V of Vs, where we had a line of 3 aircraft flying in a V, one after the other. Those formations began to break up, and I could look out the door and not see another aircraft at times, and at times I'd see them flying 2 or 3 different directions at different altitudes. And I finally concluded that the safest place we could be would be on the ground, disregarding what the Germans may do when we got there. So we went through that for a few minutes, and then the aircraft I was in was flying alone. I couldn't see any other aircraft behind us. So the aircraft made a steep turn, very steep turn, and I concluded that he had passed over our jump area and was headed back, which was, in fact, I think what it turned out to be. And the red light went on. I gave the commands to stand up, hook up, and so forth to get the jumpers ready to go in my aircraft, and the red light was on, and waiting for the green light in the side of the door, and that was our signal to go. And I waited for the green light. The green light came on. I gave the signal go, and I left the aircraft. And as I came down, I thought I had come out pretty well, because it looked like I was landing in a beautiful meadow. And as I came closer, it became obvious, of course, that it wasn't a meadow at all, but it was water. It was an inundated area where it had been flooded, and there was water everywhere. And so I splashed into the water, and I went straight down with I had more equipment on that I could get on the aircraft with. And so I had to, I went straight to the bottom, and I was in over my head, and I can't swim. Now that was a crisis for me. And I managed to, by jumping up, springing up, I managed to get a whiff of fresh air every once in a while. And as I did, I kept moving a little until finally on about the third or fourth jump, my head stayed far enough above the water, about here, that I could see where I was going, and I was about 20 feet from the bank, so I headed straight for the bank. I got on the bank, and in the meantime, while I was in the water, to avoid having my equipment and everything drag me down, and still had the parachute on, I had to get rid of all that. I had a trench knife in the boot, my right boot, and it was razor sharp. I pulled that trench knife out, and I snipped that webbing on the equipment and on my parachute, and I got rid of everything. I dumped everything in there, my rations, my change of underwear and socks, my weapon, ammunition, grenades. I was armed like I was going to win the war by myself. And but I'd left it all on the bottom of that inundated area. And I was lying on the bank trying to get my breath back and get the strength to figure out what to do. And I suddenly realized that I could encounter an enemy soldier at any time, and I would have to either fight him barehanded, or I had to have a better plan than I had, lying there trying to get my breath. So I decided that I had no choice but to go back in the water and get my weapon. And it wasn't hard to do. It wasn't hard to find it, because I could see my parachute still floating on the top of the water, and I could follow the suspension lines right back to my the harness and so forth that I'd cut off. So I knew exactly where that equipment should be. So I went there and I stomped around and was in over my head from time to time again, but I knew where I had to go to get a breath of fresh air. So I found my weapon and a couple of clips of ammunition, and I said, I'll just have to win the war with this, and picked it up and got out and got back on the bank. And I started walking down the bank of this inundated area, and I met one man. He was a man who had jumped directly behind me. He was the number 2 man in the stick, as we called him in the aircraft. And he was my radio operator. He had the radio which would enable me to call my battalion commander. And he had landed in the water too, and the radio was wet, and the radio wouldn't work. Couldn't get anyone on his radio. So we started up a little incline, a hill there, and big tree up on top of the hill. And as we reached the top of this hill, I heard a noise rustling around, and I really thought it was a cow. But we had a challenge. We were supposed to challenge flash, and the response was supposed to be thunder. So I got behind the tree and got my weapon all ready to fire, and I hoped it would fire because it had been wet, and I don't know, probably had mud in it. But I was ready to fire if it would fire. And I challenged flash, and the response was, "Flash, hell, this is Colonel Maloney." Well, Colonel Maloney was the regimental executive officer of my regiment, and he was a powerful figure of a man, and one of the great leaders, I'm sure, of the entire war. And I couldn't have met a better man to give me confidence. And he hadn't landed in the water, and he had maps, and he had a shelter half we could get under, and a little flashlight, we could look at the map. And we finally figured out where we were and where we had to go to get where we were supposed to be. and it wasn't too far away. We were pretty close to where we were supposed to be. And so he said, well, okay, this is where we're going to go. Well, I thought we ought to go the other way. I just disagreed with him. That was all there was to it. And I thought I better suggest it. Well, let's look at the map again. I think we go the other way. But I said, I think, sir, if I may say so, I think we're supposed to go the other way. We're supposed to go that way, and that's the way we're going. Let's go. Well, I had the last word in that conversation. Yes, sir. So we took off, 3 of us together, the radio operator with the radio that wouldn't work, Colonel Maloney, and me with my weapon and a couple of clips of ammunition. And we started picking up a few people as we walked along, and none of them from our regiment, none of them from the 507, several men, but we kept everyone together, and we walked up to where we thought we ought to be, and the very next person we met was General Gavin, who was Assistant Division Commander at that time. Well, it was pretty clear that I wasn't going to make any big decisions that day. Colonel Maloney turned to me and said, get some of these men and organize a perimeter defense here so that if the Germans should discover we're here and attack us, we can at least defend ourselves. So I started gathering up men and moving around and getting a perimeter defense established. And after this, you're busy for a while. Time passes, and it was beginning to get daylight, and a glider started coming in. And the glider landed very near to where we were. And as soon as the glider came to a stop, it landed, made a good landing, and men started to come out of the glider. The Germans started firing at the glider. We didn't even know there were any Germans in the area, but they were attracted by that glider, and of course, they took it under fire, and so we had engaged in our first firefight of the war right there, trying to help those people get out of that glider and join us over behind the hedgerow where we had taken up one of our defensive positions. And we stayed there for an hour or so, and then a Lieutenant Colonel Osberg, who was a battalion commander in the 507, my regiment, he came down to where I was located along this perimeter that we had established near the glider. And he said, we're supposed to take all the troops that are here and go down to meet General Gavin over near Lafayette Bridge. That's the area we were located in, up on the high ground just east of the bridge. And so we took that, and we went over and met General Gavin, and he sent us on down. He said, well, to Colonel Osberg, you take this group and go down to Chef DuPont, which is south of here, and you can follow the railroad track and get down there. And we want to take Chef DuPont, and we want to take the bridge at Chef DuPont. That's one of our objectives. And so there was another bridge located there where he was staying, and that was another one of our objectives. And then St. Mary Glees, a town about 2 or 3 kilometers up the road, was another of our objectives. So we were pretty well organized within that area at that time, but there weren't that many men there. But we took about 100 people with us down to Chef DuPont, and we went into Chef DuPont, and we started getting a little fire from some of the buildings. So we started clearing out the buildings that we were fired on, and I was engaged in that activity while Colonel Osberg took a small contingent on down to see if he could find out what was going on at the bridge, how strong it may be defended, and But he got to the bridge, he and a lieutenant that went with him, and they were both shot there, and the lieutenant, of course, was killed, and Colonel Osberg was wounded and fell off the bridge into the water, into the river. And I got word that Colonel Osberg had been shot and I was in charge. So I moved up, and it became pretty obvious to me right away that the Germans were defending that area by digging in along the shoulders of the road on the causeway. This flooded area extended about 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers to the west, to the west, and they were defending that by digging in and dispersing troops along the shoulders of that road in foxholes. About every 10 yards or so, there'd be a soldier in there with either a machine gun, submachine gun, or a rifle firing at you as you proceeded down the road, and you couldn't get there any other way because there's water on both sides of the road after you got to the bridge. So you couldn't cross the bridge because they had it so well defended on the other side that anytime you came over the curvature of that bridge, they're just short bridges, but they were extended by miles with all the water. Why, you came under fire from a machine gun that they had firing directly down that road, and it was just foolish. You couldn't make any headway that way. So I decided that I needed to develop myself a little bit of a command structure, a span of control, if you will. No way I'm going to command 100 men, and I didn't even know one of them. There wasn't one of them, the whole group of my own company, and I didn't know a single man in that group except for one lieutenant who had come in, who had been in E Company and was with the Pathfinders, and he somehow found his way into Chef DuPont, and he was there, but Lieutenant Ames, and he was the only person there that I knew. Everyone else was a stranger. And so I can't command 100 strangers. I've got to appoint some subordinate commanders. So I picked out 2 or 3 of them that had shown a willingness and an eagerness to engage with the enemy, and so I put them in charge of groups and broke the number of men that we had there into small groups, and then I started dealing with those people, and we started getting some things done. We developed a plan for attacking those foxholes on the shoulders by taking them on one foxhole at a time. We'd bring every rifle to bear that we had there that was within sight and within range of that foxhole. We had them all shooting at that hole. Well, even if you're in the hole and you've got 15 men or so shooting at you, you're gonna worry about the safety of staying there. So that started coming up out of the hole. And here's something happened that I've always taken exception to in a later historical report of this action. The statement was made that the Germans were defending tenaciously, but they probably would not have defended as tenaciously if we hadn't shot people when they were trying to surrender. But I would defy anybody to decide when a man jumps out of a foxhole with his gun in his hand or he's going to surrender or to do something else. In my opinion, the time for negotiation had long since passed. And this was a fight for survival as far as the Germans and the Americans were concerned. One guy was going to prevail, and you're going to shoot the guy that comes out of that hole on an impulse. You're not going to wait and say, "Hey, what are your intentions?" That's ridiculous, you know. And so I defend the action of our troops there, and always have, and do it at every opportunity. But we managed to very slowly but surely eliminate all the foxholes. We got to the late in the afternoon that day. We had a 60 millimeter mortar, but we didn't have any ammunition for it. But we got a resupply mission late in the afternoon. A C-47 flew over and dropped several bundles. Most of them landed in the water, but we could identify what was in the bundle by the color of the parachute. So we saw that we had some 60 millimeter mortar ammunition in one of those bundles, and we we retrieved that one, and we had ammunition in for our mortar. And with that mortar, in the meantime, I had reconnoitered around the edge of the area there and found a place that we could get fire, direct fire, on a position that I thought the machine gun was located that was making it so difficult for us to cross over the bridge. And so we got those people firing. We got the mortars shooting at the people in that machine gun position on the other side. And about 10 minutes of fire there, we discouraged them. But in the meantime, as this was going on, Colonel Maloney came back, and he said they're having difficulty at Lafayette. They're losing the bridge there. The Germans have counterattacked. General Gavin has sent me here to take all the troops that you can spare from here back up to Lafayette, the other bridge, where the general was located. So he left me there with 34 men. And almost simultaneous with his departure, as if the Germans had us under observation, which I'm sure they did, they opened fire on us with direct artillery fire from across the water on the other side. And we lost 14 of those 34 men. So I'm there with 20 men, and a messenger came from General Gavin for me to hold at all costs. And I didn't figure it was going to cost much more because we'd already pretty well paid the price. But we were there with 20 men, and we had them pretty well disposed. We had observation posts from a creamery, a big creamery that was located in the area. We had our aid station was secure in that creamery. And we had about as good a defense as we could establish with 20 men around that bridge. And this messenger came from General Gavin, who happened to be General Gavin's aide, and he said, gave me the at all cost message, and I asked for reinforcements and some more men, and I said, I think we can take this bridge. And so he came back in a little while with about 100 troops. And we organized those people and organized final attack, assault on that bridge, and we hit them with all the fire we could put on it, and then we went over. I think 5 or 6 Germans jumped up and started to retreat down the causeway to get away, and with 60 rifles firing at them, they didn't get very far. So with that, the battle was over. The bridge was ours. We had it defended on both sides, and we went as far down that causeway as I thought we could afford to with the strength of the troops that we had there. And I thought we'd done a pretty good job. At midnight, about midnight, a reconnaissance vehicle rolled in. We had no idea what had happened on the beaches. We had no idea whatsoever. But a reconnaissance vehicle from the 4th Infantry Division wheeled into the courtyard of this creamery where I had a command post set up, and they had successfully made the landing on Utah Beach. The Germans had not been able to reinforce their defenses there because the unit that was supposed to go there couldn't get there because we had control of the bridges, and because they were busy. They were busy hunting and fighting paratroopers. They had no idea how many were located there. But I reflected on our actions of the day when it was all over, and I suffered a little bit of a letdown feeling. The smell of death, dead animals everywhere, and troops who had met their death there at that fight that day. The stench of the smell of death that was permeating the night air. I realized that it was a long way to Berlin, and the day was over, but tomorrow was creeping up on us. But that was the end of D-Day at Chef de Pront Bridge. The bridge was ours, and we held it.
Well, thank you very much for that account, Colonel Creek. And I should just point out that Colonel Creek continued to fight and lead in the 507th as it completed its time in the 82nd Airborne Division, became a part of the 17th Airborne Division for the Battle of the Bulge and Operation Varsity. And then he remained in the Army until about 1968 and got into Army aviation. Okay, critical decision time, and I'm making a command decision. We're out of time right now, but to hell with that. We're going to keep going. I'm going to get so fired for this. Our next panel is led by Roland Gull. Roland, do I have your permission? I might get into your time a little bit, but you know what? We're going to flex. We're just going to make this happen because this is a magic panel, and I want you to hear the rest of what everybody else has to say. And moving on to our next panelist, Harold Baumgarten landed on Omaha Beach at about 6:30 in the morning on June 6, 1944. And in the fighting that followed, he was very badly wounded, but it's a story he should tell you. You should hear it directly from him. Dr. Baumgarten, tell us a little bit about D-Day.
Right. Roy already alluded to the weather. So I'm going to talk about the weather aspect of D-Day. I believe, in my opinion, that the weather was a greater enemy than the German soldiers. Now, you all probably remember when Eisenhower looked out the window in his command office and he got the report from this meteorologist, British meteorologist, that the weather was going to clear for 24 hours. So he said, we'll go. Now, during that time, I was in the harbor of Weymouth, England, on the Empire Javelin with Company A, B, C, and D of the 1st Battalion, 116th Regiment of the 29th Division. It had been raining the 3rd and the 4th, and the 5th it magically cleared. And we steamed out of the harbor at 5 p.m. And we joined this huge armada going towards south, towards Normandy, towards France. My ship anchored 11 miles north of Omaha Beach. We were going to attack the Dog Green sector, which was the heaviestly defended part of Omaha Beach. It was the beach that was portrayed in Saving Private Ryan and The Longest Day. And the weather was okay until we decided to leave the ship at 3:30 in the morning. They couldn't let us go down rope ladders. We had to be lowered down in our little craft. There were 24 boats. There were 6 boats to each company, 30 men in each boat. So if your math is with me, that's 720 men, which when the boats hit the water, they were thrown around like matchsticks. There was no head coverings, like in there. There's no seats. And the ship I was in had lower sides, and the water filled up in the boats. Every man was soaked with the icy cold English Channel water. So the weather changed. It became severe. We had a 3-hour trip to get to our rendezvous on Dog Green sector. Now, at that evening, Hitler took his usual sleeping pill, and he didn't wake up till 2 in the afternoon. Rommel said, who was in charge of the defenses, the Atlantic Wall, he said, no idiot would attack in this weather. So he went back to Germany to bring his wife a pair of French gray shoes for her birthday, which was June 6th. Now, during that time, we had the battleship Texas was going, as was alluded to before, was going to shell Dog Green sector for a period of from 5:55 to 6:25. Now you might think of the Pacific War was mentioned this week, where the Navy shelled the beaches for 2 to 3 days. They couldn't do that in France because the Germans had 55 divisions that they could move up and push Walter Ehlers and me off the Omaha Beach into the English Channel. They had to stay 12 miles out because of these huge coastal guns that the Germans had. So their range was off. They fired over the beach. and they didn't hit anything that was significant for us. They were also going to fire 4,000 5-inch rockets at Dog Green sector. But these also were ineffective. They looked like a flock of birds going towards the beach, but they landed harmlessly in the water. The Navy also provided underwater demolition men because the Germans had 4 rows of diabolical obstacles on that beach, all barbed wired, all mined, and these underwater demolition men who had a rough time due to the weather to reach that beach before we landed, and they did the best they could. They were partially successful. Now, we had, Dog Green sector was so important to the Allied command that they had 32 dual drive Sherman tanks. These were the amphibious tanks. 16 were assigned to Dog Green Beach. In training, they came in from 6,000 yards out, like boats. When they came up on the beach, they would lower their canvas rubberized sides, and the Germans were going to be faced with 16 75mm cannons at point blank range and machine guns. Unfortunately, 14 of these tanks drowned because the weather, the heavy seas, the 15-foot waves and 10-mile knot winds. So we only had 2 tanks got up on Dog Green sector, and one was immediately destroyed by the German artillery. So we had 1 tank when we were about to land. The Army Air Corps came over from England with 450 planes. They were going to drop 12,000 tons of bombs on Omaha Beach. Now this sounds great, doesn't it? It was the same power that hit Hiroshima. However, when the bombardiers got over the coast of France, they had very bad cloud cover. They were afraid to hit the troops coming in, so they delayed their drop for 3 seconds. And by the time they dropped their bombs, they landed 7 miles south of the beach and killed some Norman cows. Now, what about the men coming in? We had 4 companies coming in. Company C got lost in the rough weather. They landed with Walt Ehlers' 1st Division. They lost 1 man, 1 casualty, going up the bluff. A fellow named Ray Shura of Kenilworth, New Jersey, got shot in the ankle. Company D, with its 180 men, landed 200 yards to the east of Dog Green sector. They lost 34 men, plus their captain. Now, on Dog Green sector, we were supposed to have the 720 men landing to attack the 450 Germans up on the bluff with these tremendous pillboxes, 3 of them, and trenches full of 3 machine guns and riflemen telescopic sights, 105mm mortars on the bluff. It was a 100-foot bluff. The only cover on that beach for an infantryman was a 25-foot cement seawall. And looming up from that was the 100-foot bluff. So they had the 105mm mortars up there. They had 3 miles south of the beach, they had 5 88mm cannons. Now, Company A and B came right in on target. Target was the white steeple of the church in Villers-sur-Mer, France, up on the top of the bluff. But Company A had lost 3 boats to drowning. Company B lost 2 boats, 1 way to the east and 1 way to the west. So we had 7 boats. If your math is with me, that's only 210 men. And as my little boat came in, a Company B boat hit a mine and blew up. We were showered with wood, metal, and body parts, and blood. So now we had 180 men. When our ramp went down, that's an example of a ramp over there, the First Lieutenant Harold Donaldson of Texas was gunned down in the boat by these machine guns, which right away zeroed in on the exit to our boat. I was behind Clarice Riggs of Pennsylvania. I was the 5th man on the left side of the boat. He got gunned down on the ramp. I dove in behind him, and there I was standing in neck-deep, bloody red water with my rifle over my head. I was 5'10" on the D-Day. I shrunk a little since then. Now, what happened to our 5'4" guys, 5'5"? They stepped off the ramp, and they were wearing these beautiful combat jackets that the United States Army decided to issue for D-Day. They were green canvas jackets with 4 pockets in the front and 2 in the back. And these things, when they were wet, they just pulled them down further. So they drowned. And those that tried to get off these jackets were bobbing up and down, and the machine guns were taking them out. Now, we had to cross 400 yards of open beach in order to get to that seawall, which was our only protection. 25-foot seawall, slanted away at a 45-degree angle with black shale rocks. We ran across the beach, and when we got to 120 yards from this seawall, a machine gun spray came from right to left, from the bluff, from the trenches on the bluff, and I heard a loud thud on my right front. My rifle vibrated. We were carrying them across our chest, port arms. I saw a clean hole through its receiver. This is the little plate, little rectangular plate in front of the trigger guard. My 7 bullets in my magazine section had saved my life, because there was another thud behind me to the left, and that soldier was gone. I hit the sand behind the last row of obstacles on the beach, the most common obstacle seen in pictures up on the 3rd floor here on D-Day, the hedgehog, which was 3 steel rails welded together, cemented into the ground, and standing 5 foot high. I observed to my right, Private Robert Dittmar of Fairfield, Connecticut, had been shot in the chest. He tripped over one of these hedgehogs, was completely turned around, sprawled on his back, looking skyward and yelling, "I'm hit, Ma, Mother," and then he was silent. I looked over to my left, and Sergeant Clarence Robeson of Lynchburg, Virginia, was staggering by me without his helmet, gaping hole in the left side of his helmet. His blonde hair was streaked with blood. I yelled for him to get down, but the noise on that beach was horrendous. He went all the way to my left, a little behind me, knelt down facing the wall, took out his rosary beads, and started praying. Machine gun up on the bluff cut him in half, but I mean really cut him in half. We had 85% casualties in the first 15 minutes. Only 2 of us survived our boat team of 30, Charles Connor of Charleston, West Virginia, and myself. I was wounded 3 times on June 6th and twice on June 7th. Now you may think to yourself, what kind of idiot would keep fighting with all those wounds? General Bradley on the cruiser Augustus, he said, no more reinforcements will go to Door Green sector. They're going to be left there. We were supposed to have Company L of the 115th Infantry to come in to reinforce us. He sent them to the east, which the beaches were more easily accessible. But we had options. Stay on the beach and die, surrender to the Germans, the beach. We decided to fight wounded. So 12 of my walking wounded went up that bluff and took on the Germans. Now, what I like to call the miracle of Vierville-sur-Mer, of Door Green sector, is that by 12 midnight, every gun was silent on that beach. Every German was either killed, captured, or ran. But that beach was covered with dead 29th Division soldiers and their blood. And now, as Paul Harvey would say, for the rest of the story, read my book, which is in the bookstore, D-Day Survivor.
It's worth mentioning that Dr. Baumgarten's book is actually an incredible firsthand account of combat on Omaha Beach on D-Day, and it goes into great detail about the months upon months of recovery that he had to endure from the wounds that he received during the action. He's just come out with a new edition of the book that is in hardback. I encourage you all to pick it up and read it if you have not already done so. Now, finally, at the end of our panel, we have another Omaha Beach survivor. Walt Ehlers landed on Omaha Beach as a part of the 18th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. And he landed there that day with his brother. Mr. Ehlers, could you please tell us a little bit about your experiences on D-Day, sir?
Good morning. It wasn't a very good morning on D-Day. We had, when we were coming in to Normandy that day, we were on LCIs. I was supposed to be in the second wave. And we got the message that the first wave was pinned down on the beach, and they wanted more men on the beach immediately. So the first Higgins boat that got back came back by our ship and picked up my squad off of a headquarters ship that we were on, which was an LCI. And the LCIs are all for the second wave. And so they took us off of there, put us on the landing craft, like this one right over here, just the same ones that went on the first wave. And we went in early. We went in before the second wave came in, so we had to join the first wave. And we weren't prepared for the chaos that we saw on the beach when we got there. Now, to give you an idea about what was happening, when we were out on the water, there were so many boats out there on the water, you couldn't believe how many there were. And at the same time, earlier in the morning, airplanes like this one up here above your head, there were hundreds of them, over 800 of them in the air at one time above us, flying over and going over with glider planes flying in behind them. That is, they were towing them. And then they had paratroopers going over. Then they had all these bombers going over, and everything's happening. We thought there ought not be any problem on that beach by the time we got there. We could hear the bombs dropping on the beaches, we thought. Anyway, they're supposed to be on our beach, but it wasn't happening on our beach. And we saw the Navy out there firing these rocket ships, and we'd see those 10 rockets go off at one time, and that ship would literally list back when those rockets go off over into the... And we thought, wow, there should be nothing on that beach by the time we got there. But all we found when we got there was bodies. And the thing is that we were on this Higgins boat. We got close to the beach, and we hit a sandbar. And like he was explaining, we were out there about 100 yards out in the water, and we had to let the driver said it was as far as he could go, and so they let the sand down, and we go running out the ship. Of course, they were shelling, and they were still shooting machine guns at us when we came in. And we got up on the beach, and there's a beach master up there, a lieutenant commander. And my orders were to take my squad into reconnoiter, to run a patrol into, a reconnaissance patrol into the city of Triviers, which is about 6 miles inland. Well, needless to say, we never got no 6 miles inland on the first day. When we got up on the beach, I didn't have any orders because I wasn't with my company. Just me and my squad on that Higgins boat coming in there. And we're landed on the beach without any advice or anything. So I had to take it on my own command to do what I was supposed to do when I landed on the beach. So, well, I was going to take my squad in and go to Triviers if I could get there, but that didn't happen that way. First thing I heard when I got on the beach was someone say, "Come on, 16, let's go." And then I heard someone else say, "Which 16?" There were two 16s on the beach that day, the 116th and the 16th. The 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division was the leading regiment on the beach there, and the 116th was on the right, attached to the 1st Infantry Division that day. And General Cody didn't take over the 116th till the next day. And so they were all under control of the 1st Infantry Division when they landed. But we landed east of where Harold landed, and there was no seawall in front of us. It was just a flat beach all the way up to, and there were wire across the beach. And when the beachmaster told us to take this path, he said, don't go right or left of it because you'll step on mines. Well, we could see the reason, because there were people, the path was made by people who had stepped on the mines, and there were people still laying there on the beach and so forth and wounded. And we got up to the last row of wire. It hadn't been blown yet, so that beach wasn't completely cleared. By the way, there were no there were no minesweepers or anything like that on the beach. There was nobody on that beach before the 1st Infantry Division and the 116th Infantry Regiment came on that beach that day. There was nobody out there to clear those beaches. There weren't even any shell holes. There were no bomb craters. No bombs hit the area where we landed at all. There was nothing. And all we had up there was, we had 2 big pillboxes up there on the hill in front of us, and we had one on across the valley and up on the hill, and they had a machine gun on the top of it, and we could see why they were shooting that machine gun out across there. Even it was still up there when we came in. And they were shooting, and the first thing when we got on the beach, the guys wanted to lay down on the beach. I said, you can't do that. You're going to die if you stay here, just like the rest of them around here. And so I moved them on, and we got up to that last row of wire, and we found 2 Bangalore torpedo men who had blown the previous wire. I said, can't you blow the wire for us? They said, well, we can't move. As soon as we move, the snipers shoot us. So we said, well, we'll fire up in a volley up in the hill. So we were out there firing, and the guys got up to blow the wire, and one guy got the Bangalore torpedo on, the other guy got killed. The first one finally set the Bangalore off, and then when the wire blew, of course, we rushed through it. Now, in the meantime, though, while we were doing this, we saw Bangalore, people carrying pole charges up to the pillbox over on our right there to put into the breach of the pillbox, but they didn't make it. There were 3 of them, actually 3 of them, that got killed before they got there. That's one job I didn't want, is to carry a pole up in the face of a pillbox, and with a pole charge on it. And so when we got through the wire, we got up into the trenches, and the Germans started running from us. And we captured 4 of them. We sent them back down on the beach for interrogation. The rest of them we had to kill. We captured the pillbox from the rear. And that's what we did on D-Day. Now, believe it or not, I got all 12 of my men off of the beach without a casualty that day, which was unheard of. The first wave, they lost. The first wave lost over 50% casualties, but when you were on the beach, the people who were landing on the beach, there was 100% casualties to many of them. There were complete squads wiped out, complete companies and complete battalions. The 16th Infantry Regiment lost 2 complete companies down on the east side where they landed. And there's another man by the name of Dawson, I'm sure you know him, and he had to organize, lost most all of his company, and he finally got enough people together to form a small company to continue the assault on the hill in order to make it successful. And he got the Distinguished Service Cross for that day. But, you know, it was just amazing that anybody got off of that beach without getting hit. And so that night, when we were up on the hedgerow, we were up there, and they weren't through shooting yet. The Navy wasn't anyway, because we found out that when these 2 airplanes from the German Air Force came down to strafe our beach in the evening, they came low enough that the Navy had to lower their guns to shoot at the airplanes, and lo and behold, they were landing in the shells were landing on the field just beyond where we were laying there in front of the hedgerow. We thought they were after us. But then we were out there and we fought the whole day on the 7th, on the 7th, on the 6th rather, and then on the night of the 7th, we had a perimeter out there. We were in short ways, and a German patrol ran through our perimeter, and they got fired upon when they came in, but we couldn't fire them when they got inside our perimeter because if we'd been firing on one another. So they ran through. Company commander said they wanted somebody to follow that German patrol that came through. Well, my squad got the job, and so it's just me and 4 men. It was like a patrol. And so I took the 4 guys. We went down the road, and we couldn't see the Germans at all, but we could hear them. And we went down this road, and we went as far as we could. We came upon a briefcase. We picked it up, and I told the guys, and after we'd walked a few, probably, I don't know, a half mile further, I said, we don't know where we're going, so we're going to turn around and go back. We got this briefcase, and we went back, took it to the headquarters, and then when they opened up the briefcase, they found the 2nd and 3rd line of defense maps in there of the Germans' withdrawal positions. And so the next day, on the 8th, while we're headed up in that direction, and then for the action for which I received this medal was on the 9th and 10th of June. But we started hitting machine gun nests on the head. We had a patrol over in the left, our platoon over on our left, on the field in our left, and they got fired upon. And I was bringing up my squad through the field on the right here, and as we were going up there, and when they got fired upon, I rushed my men up to the hedgerow in front of us because I didn't want to get caught out in the middle of the field like I'd have seen it happen the day before, people getting pinned down out there. So because I was the only man in my squad that had any previous combat experience, I went on down the road and had them to follow me, and I could smell the Germans before I could see them because they ate some kind of a black bread and had some sweet kind of a licorice that they took with it, and it had a kind of a sweet, sickening smell, and I could always smell that. And so I came up on this hedgerow, and I was going down alongside, and I thought sure I was smelling, but then I got up on the hedgerow, and here I came in contact with 4 men right down there in front of me with their guns pointed at me, enemy patrol. And they were firing a machine gun up in the corner, and I knew I had to get up to the machine gun, but the only way I was going to get there is to shoot these guys because they would have shot me if I hadn't have. And so I shot them before they had a chance to think about it. And then I went on up the hedgerow, knocked out a machine gun nest up there, and then there was another one started firing, and so we went on up the hedgerow further into another corner. We found this other machine gun, we knocked it out, and went up on a mound behind it to see. By the way, after I met the enemy patrol, I had all my men to fix their bayonets because we were so close to them that if, when that clip goes out of that gun, you got to reload, and they might take advantage of you while you're reloading and try to hit you, so you want to be ready for them. So if you have the bayonet, that's kind of it's a good thing to scare them off. It gives you a good, makes the people a little bit scared of you, when they see that bayonet. And when we went up on that mound, and I come up there and I'm at port arms with the bayonet fixed, and then I saw these 12 men down there. There was 2 big mortar sections, and the size of our 80 millimeter mortars, and we started shooting them. We shot all of them and knocked them out and went on further that day and got one more machine gun nest. And then the next day, on the 10th of June, I was leading my squad up alongside of a hedgerow. This time I wasn't out in the middle of a field, but I got fired from 3 sides, from that field over there and from this field over here and from both hedgerows in front of us. And the company commander told us to withdraw from the position. I knew if we withdrew or turned our backs on it, we were going to get shot in the back. And sure enough, what happens is that we did go up. I went up on the mound to shoot, and my automatic rifleman came up to help me fire. And so we fired in a semicircle. The rest of the squad got back. The first day I lost a man in my squad was on the 10th of June. He got killed up on the hedgerow. But we did get the rest of the squad back behind the hedgerow, and when we turned around to go back ourselves, I saw him putting a machine gun down in a corner down there, so I was busy shooting at these three guys that were putting in the machine gun when I suddenly got hit in the back, and it spun me around. When it did, it hit me in my rib, went into my pack, hit a bar of soap, went through my mother's picture, by the way, which was in a little poster frame, you know, with her picture inside of it, and it went through the edge of it, and it hit the bar of soap, and it sent the bullet through my trench shovel in the back. And so when after I'd got hit, I went up to pick up the BAR man. I carried him back, and then I went back and got the BAR. And when I got back, they were putting my automatic rifleman on the ambulance, and I told the doctor, I said, well, you better have that. I told my company commander, I said, you better have the doctors look at my wound in my back. He turned me around, he's looked at my back, and he says, my God, you've been shot clear through. You should be dead. I said, oh, no. He says, I said, well, we'll take off the pack. We took off the pack, and they could see what happened, you know. It went in there, and they hit that bar of soap and turned it around and sent it back through. We took out the picture of my mother, and I said, hey, look at that, there. It went right through the edge of the picture, but she had that stern look on her face, and it said, how dare they? So my mother was a great person. She did a lot of praying for us boys. She had a boy in the Pacific, fought 3 years in the Pacific. My other brother was with me. He got killed, by the way, on D-Day when he came in. He came in on the second wave. The second wave was tough, too. And he got killed on the second wave when he was on an LCI. So it wasn't an easy time, any time, all day on that beach. And listening to the other 5 people here, I wondered what in the heck I was doing there. But because there was so much going on. There was so much that day going on that you can't believe. And seeing Saving Private Ryan is just one little tenth of a part of that picture, you know. Omaha Beach is 6 miles long all by itself. The entire beachhead is 60 miles long from one end to the other. That's how big that beach was. That's how many boats were involved and so forth in there. It's unimaginable to be able to see that all at one time, especially in a motion picture. So it's a real hard story to tell to a lot of people, but they did a great job that day, and it did change the way of the world. I went on to get wounded many more times after that, but we'll talk about that later.
Well, let's once again recognize all of our panelists. John Pellegren, Joachim Hoene, Don Malarkey, Roy Creek, Hal Baumgarten, and Walter Ehlers. Thank you, gentlemen.
Returning home, new challenges and embracing liberation. It was back in October, approximately 2002, when the museum started putting the conference together. Dr. Mueller envisioned a 60th anniversary marking the end of World War II that would include all participants. Memory Hall would be part of this program. When we started developing the program and thinking about this particular panel, our thoughts were, how do we capture the stories of the veterans from the Allies and the Axis power that returned home? Returning home is a nebulous term because it can mean many things. A devastated homeland, recovering from injuries, strict rationing, an economy that's collapsed, or maybe one that's progressing, and challenges that weren't looked at the time, like women in the workplace, especially in the US and Germany. When the boys returned home, some of them were in for a surprise. During the war, estimates reflected 96 million people served between the Allies and the Axis, and I want to thank Kimberly from UNO for those statistics. Between 16 and 21 million, depending on the source, died in the war. Additionally, 30 million civilians died as a result of the war. So returning home has another meaning. Returning home also stirs memories of moms and dads, sisters and brothers, and in some cases, complete losses of families. Conversely, it means to other families the loss of a son or daughter, a mother or father, and returning home meant a coffin coming home, or someone not coming home at all. At this time, I'd like to pause. Excuse me. I'd like to pause and remember all those who've given the ultimate sacrifice, to include those serving today in all of our countries around the world, Iraq, Afghanistan, and all countries. We are indebted to their sacrifice. Don Stratton was a 19-year-old seaman first class on the USS Arizona when Japanese warbirds swooped down on Pearl Harbor's battleship Roe. It was 65 years ago, almost to the day. Within 2 hours, sank or damaged were 21 vessels of the Pacific Fleet. Of the 1,177 officers, sailors, and Marines that made up the Arizona's company, only 330 survived. When the bombing started, Don had actually just finished breakfast with a couple of oranges in his hand, and he was taking them to one of his fellow sailors in sickbay. He immediately reported to his battle station on the port side of the Arizona on the gun deck above the bridge. He said they were torpedoing us. I should do a better job with that word. And I watched as the USS Oklahoma capsized. Then it seemed like we were hit by a solid earthquake. The Arizona was a 35,000-ton ship, but it shook like a piece of paper. Well, that earthquake was an 800-kilogram bomb dropped by a Japanese high-altitude bomber, and it smashed into the Arizona starboard deck. There were 50 or 60 people at the time with Don, and a ball of fire encompassed them all. Don Stratton was one of 5 sailors who survived that fireball. Badly burned on his hands and legs, Don and several other sailors used a line stretched between the Arizona and the USS Vestal and went hand over the burning wreckage of the Arizona to the safe haven of the Vestal. In the process, more than 60% of Don's body was burned. He endured 5 skin grafts and a convalescent period of nearly a year. He was awarded the Purple Heart, and he was given a medical discharge. But it didn't stop there for Don. He could have went home. 2 years later, after Pearl Harbor, Don re-enlisted in the Navy and returned to the Pacific Campaign on a destroyer, participating in the invasion of the Philippines and Okinawa before he was discharged again in 1945. What many people don't know, they think, Don was medically discharged, he comes back and he's fine. Don persevered for over 50 years with skin grafts. His last skin graft was in the mid-1990s, and he showed it to me yesterday. So it wasn't just after the war, 10 years, but 50 years of enduring times in hospitals for skin grafts and other medical ailments. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Don Stratton.
Thank you. Well, he just about told my whole story there. I was born and raised in a little town of Red Cloud, Nebraska, and of course, not much money around back in the 30s there, so had to go in the Navy. $21 a month sounded pretty good. So I had to I went to Bremerton, to Great Lakes, and boot camp, and then we caught the Arizona and Bremerton, Washington, proceeded down to Long Beach and over to Hawaii and done some maneuvers, and back to Long Beach, back to Hawaii again, and more maneuvers, and back into the harbor, and was there that day. I was a sight setter and the port anti-aircraft director for the port anti-aircraft guns. It was one deck above the bridge where the admiral and the captain were both killed. Actually, we were kind of isolated there. That 600-700 foot ball of fire just engulfed us and no escape. But the director kind of protected us a little bit. So after the flames kind of died down and the smoke blew away a little bit, and always a little sea breeze going, and this sailor on the vessel throws us a line, and we proceeded to pull across the heavier line, and we crawled across that line hand over hand, six of us actually, and hand over hand hanging down, and after we were already burnt. I was burnt over about between 60 and 70% of my body. Anyway, we went to the hospital in Pearl and was there for a while. Was sent back to the United States. Got back to Mare Island, California, U.S. Naval Hospital, Christmas Day, 1941. It was about 9 months or so or better in the hospital in Mare Island, and was shipped to Corona, California for a little convalescence. They had the Navy had taken over a hotel and had a golf course and a swimming pool and mineral baths and so forth. Finally got well enough to go home on leave, and came back from leave, and they said, well, we don't think you can make the service right now, so we're going to discharge you. They discharged me. I went back to Nebraska, and I stayed for about a year, and I got a lot better, and after a little over a year, and I re-enlisted in the Navy, and they told me, well, you have to go through the draft. Okay, I got some friends on the draft board. So they got me to Omaha, Nebraska, and then I had to wait for about 4 or 5 days for them to get permission from the Navy to get me back in the service. And got my same service number, which I'm glad I did now. It ends with all the claims and the stuff you have to go through to get anything out of the government. Anyway, they wanted me to stay in boot camp. They said, well, you're back in the Navy, you had to go to boot camp again. So I had to go through boot camp again in Farragut, Idaho. And I was a recruit CPO for 120 men, and I pushed them through camp there. And they wanted me to stay there and just do some more, 120 more men and 120 more men and whatever. And I said, no, I want to go to sea. So they sent me to Treasure Island, and I caught a destroyer, the DD-406 USS Stack. Proceeded to the South Pacific, and participated in two or three or four invasions in New Guinea, Hollandia, and Wewak, both the invasions of Philippines and Okinawa. And the Navy sent me back to electrical hydraulic school in San Diego. And when I got back to the States, then this time I got a 30-day leave and I went home. When I come back and entered the school, the war was over in August, I think, and sometime in 1945. And I had enough points to get charged because I had been in this service before. Well, they said, we can't discharge you unless you go finish the school. So I had to finish the school, which I did, and I was sent to St. Louis, Missouri, and was discharged the second time, December the 4th, 1945. So I go back home, and I met and married my wife of 56 years in April. Where are you, sweetheart? Yeah. And to this union, we had a older son, the oldest son, Robert, who lives in Santa Barbara. We had a girl, Gypsy Dawn, we lost a few days after birth. We had another son that worked for the post office in Colorado Springs. And right now, and then we had another girl, Roxanne Joe, and we lost her about 5 days after birth. So right now I have 4 granddaughters and 1 grandson, excuse me. So I think the good Lord made up for part of the damage there. Anyway, worked several odd jobs around in Nebraska and run a laundry truck, cleaning truck, laundry cleaning truck, run a beer truck. I said, well, this ain't getting it. I'm going to go to California. So we loaded up our family and we come to California. We arrived in Santa Barbara on Labor Day in 1959. So in the meantime, I was fortunate enough to go down to Long Beach and pick up a merchant marine document for an able seaman, and I went to work on the offshore drilling barges, which was, we had to anchor up out there with 20,000-pound anchors and do the drilling work. And we didn't do the drilling work, we were just in charge of the seamanship on board. And finally graduated from there. I was a barge master on one of the largest drill ships that came out for a while. And after that I got, well, that's not, a little interested in a little something else. So my youngest brother was working for the deep sea divers. So he got me a job with the deep sea divers, so I worked with them for about 25 years. We worked in Alaska, we worked in Nicaragua, we worked in Chile, we worked in Colombia, we worked in Kuwait, we've done a lot of platform. We put in a lot of the platforms in the Cook Inlet in Alaska, done some pipeline work. We worked Diablo Canyon in California. We pipeline and 2 or 3 pipelines off the coast. Participated in the explosion, the blowout that they had in Santa Barbara, and we helped fix that. So it was quite an experience. And I also, during all this experience, I made a dive in a 2-man submarine to 1,100 feet of water with a little gentleman called Bill Dickort. And come back, well, that's about the end of my story. Outside of, I've retired and I lived in Santa Barbara for about 25 years, and I lived in Yuma for about 15, Arizona. And I'm back right now in Santa Maria for about the last 6 years. And right now I'd like to take a little time and say I appreciate all the doctors and nurses and corpsmen that they're in the service, but I especially love them in Pearl Harbor and Mare Island and Corona, California. Thank you. God bless, and God bless America.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Well, congratulations to the Marine Corps on his birthday.
Thank you, Don.
Forgot, a little belated, but...
Well, we're 231. We look darn good, don't we? Thanks. Ed Horton was the first out of the rear hatch of his B-25 Mitchell after they bombed Tokyo. He was part of crew number 10, one of 16 crews that took off from the USS Hornet. Ed's returning home was a little different because he didn't return home right away, as we'll talk about. Ed retired as a master sergeant in 1960 from the United States Air Force. So returning home to Ed means, in part, continuing to serve his country. Ed Horton.
After the raid on Tokyo, I bailed out over China and eventually got into Chongqing with the rest of the members of our group. From Chongqing, we went to Calcutta and stayed in Calcutta about 2 weeks or 10 days, I can't remember. After Calcutta, we went back into China, I stayed there a year and a half after that, in missions out of Kunming, China. I stayed there a year and a half, and one day the word came that I was to go back to the States. Not just myself, but about 6 of us to go back to the States. Getting back to the States, I came from a small town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And when I got home, they gathered everybody together. It wasn't a large town. It was just a small town, maybe a couple hundred people. And everyone was gathered together in the town hall at Eastham, Massachusetts. And that was my homecoming. After that, I was reassigned to a medium bomb organization in Central Florida. It would be A-26s. And I stayed with A-26s up until I was reassigned to a organization that I stayed with for the duration of my bombardment type aircraft tours. I was assigned to the climatic laboratory at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, which was the same base that the Doolittle Raiders trained at. The climatic laboratory was concerned with primarily environmental type testing, and I stayed there in civil service for 20 years and retired from civil service. Also retired from the Air Force. I make my home in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Live there pretty much by myself nowadays. But that's about the story of my life after the raid on Tokyo.
Ed, do you remember the first year that you attended? Because Jimmy had said right before you guys left he was going to throw a hell of a party after the raid was over, and I don't think you made the first one in Miami.
Yeah, I missed the first one in Miami. My first son was born on the day that that General Doolittle gave us a big party in the McFadden Deauville in Miami Beach. So I missed the first one. But I made most of them after that.
Thank you, Ed. Frances Skiba Hoffman was a woman Marine who served in Hawaii and was honorably discharged. Her story is a little different, as she'll go into, but her family had Russian ethnicity. So here's an honorably discharged Marine returning home, subject of an investigation. And a lot of people didn't see it at the time, but basically it's what began the Cold War. Another thing a lot of people don't know about Frances, she's donated thousands, literally thousands of hours here to the museum, and without volunteers like Frances, the museum would not survive. Ladies and gentlemen, a true patriot, Frances Skiba Hoffman.
Well, I hope I don't talk too long. I wrote down things because I can't have a good memory. But I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1923. My parents were Russian immigrants My mother died when I was 5, and my father brought up 6 children with the help of a sponsor. In June of '41, I graduated from high school. College was never a consideration. In December, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and it was the beginning of the Second World War. Early in 1942, men were leaving for military service, and women were asked to take jobs in factories. There was an urgent need to produce supplies for the war. So I became a factory worker. I was a grinding machine operator, and I worked the second shift of a 24-hour factory. We had to buy our own tools. I had to travel to work on public streetcars. We brought our lunch and ate our lunch at our machines, and the men were more than willing to teach the women the jobs because that was urgent. In 1943, the Marine Corps opened a recruiting office at the main post office in Milwaukee, and women were accepted for the first time. So I applied. We had to take IQ tests, physical and psychological tests, and to get 3 references. One of the references I got was from a school teacher who said I was not qualified to become a Marine because I was an immigrant's daughter. After a few months, I was ordered to report to the Union Railroad Station in Chicago. Women from all over the country gathered there, and that evening, we boarded a train for our overnight trip to North Carolina. Camp Lejeune was newly built at that time, and we went through boot training there. My first assignment after boot camp was to the aircraft salvage yard in Cherry Point, North Carolina. Women worked with mechanics who disassembled military aircraft for parts to be reused. The women took these parts to the warehouse up a muddy hill in a wheelbarrow. We were called grunts. This tour of duty was brief, and we were replaced by women who were formally trained to be real mechanics. It was about that time that I had an opportunity to transfer to Hawaii. Before going to there, we were required to go through further intensive training in San Diego. We attended classes preparing for overseas, including use of fire weapons, a series of swimming tests, and cultural indoctrination. From there, we boarded a troop ship, and after several days at sea, we arrived in Oahu, Hawaii, and the U.S. Naval Station in Ewa. I was assigned to the Marine Headquarters, which dealt with troop movements and supplies needed for our combat Marines. I was an IBM computer operator, and we used the same system to arrange for transportation for the Marines that came back from the war. There was a special effort in that area to assign PWOs and rehab patients to travel by planes rather than ships. Being in Hawaii when the war ended was a happy time. We had special liberty to go to Honolulu. There was an all-day parade. Our group had special transportation, and we were able to stay in town through the night. From a high hill above the harbor, Pearl Harbor, we were able to see the ships light up in harbor for the first time in celebration of the end of the war. There was a cumbersome system set up for our return to the United States, and my name came up in the November selection. We traveled by hospital ship to Mare Island in San Francisco, and then traveled cross-country by train to Washington, D.C., where we were discharged. When I was discharged, I did not go home directly. My best friend was going to marry her childhood sweetheart in New York, and I agreed to be her maid of honor. The wedding party was all in uniform, women Marines and sailors. The groom suggested we march down the aisle, but nobody was willing to call cadence. I got home in time for Christmas. So did my sister's husband, who was an Army infantry soldier who fought in Africa and in Italy. So did my sister Esther's husband come home. He was on the USS Nelson on D-Day in Normandy. The ship was torpedoed, and he was one of the 12 men left on board when it was towed to safe harbor for repair. Their families and our family came together on that Christmas day. The house was filled with laughter, tears, and joy. It was a perfect homecoming. Almost immediately after the Second World War, Russia made a grab for the Russian made the grab for power. It began. It's history now, but the threat to the world was huge and very real. Our country did much to save Russians from the German invasion, and Russia became the invader. A new and ugly political threat was born, and the lives of many countries were affected by it. New fears gripped the world. Along with many others in that country, I faced a new war. We were involved in a Cold War with Russia. The joy of coming home quickly ended. The Cold War lasted many years. I hoped to take my father to Kiev in Russia while he was still able to travel, but the development caused us to give up that idea. We knew people who had communist leaning. I grew up close to a friend whose father was an active communist in World War II, but we were separated by the war, and I discontinued that relationship. It was the time of McCarthyism, and he was a senator from the state of Wisconsin. After serving my country, I was suspected of communist sympathies. My father was painfully disturbed by the investigations because he fled Russia in 1918 when Lenin and Stalin and the Communist Party came to power. One of my friends was going to college in another state, and we had a lengthy correspondence. He played a role in my dilemma. Months passed and our mystery continued. My friend was had a college roommate who had a brother who was selling secrets to the Russians. I never met them, but it turned out to be the main cause of my investigation. Legal proceedings took time, and he was eventually sent to prison. I was cleared and was allowed to get along with the rest of my life. It is common knowledge that a Marine can make the impossible possible. My Marine Corps discipline gave me the strength to endure this time in my life. The strength lingers with me and will last the rest of my life. I found meaning in my retirement. I found comfort at the D-Day Museum with my fellow veteran visitors. And that's the end of my return to this country. But
not only folks like Frances, because of the Cold War and what she had to go through, but returning home for a lot of ethnicities, color, had a different meaning because segregation was all around, and segregation is still all around today, and hopefully we can change it, and hopefully these young people can do it for us, because I don't think we're doing such a good job of it. Thank you, Frances. Joachim Hoene, born in Heilbronn, Germany, near Stuttgart. He was with the Luftwaffe and flew a Messerschmitt. His father flew in World War I with with a German ace that some of you might be familiar with named Baron Richthofen. And he was commander of a bomber group during World War II, where his father flew the Heinkel 111, a twin-engine bomber. The end of the war did not see liberation for Joe. Yes, Joe, because that was an American when he was incarcerated as a POW following the end of German surrender in April. The gentleman who was in charge of Joe couldn't pronounce his real name, so they gave him the nickname Joe, and it's actually stuck ever since, because he told me to call him Joe. But I can't pronounce his name right either, the first name. But following the war, Joe remained in Germany, and he basically became part of the reconstruction of Germany in the infrastructure. Joe came to the United States in 1956. Joachim Hoene.
My dear friends, I really never talk too much about this bad or the worst time in my life as a prisoner of war. Grew up in a family which my dad was a famous pilot and hero in World War I, and naturally as a boy I was dreaming about to become one too. As I grew, finally ended up as glider pilot and volunteered to fly the rocket plane Me-163, which I didn't tell my dad about it, and he raised holy hell because half of the pilots get killed on takeoff. I made it twice, and then we ran out of fuel and called us Air Force Infantry, and ended up down in Stuttgart, Böblingen, and we had to walk on the Autobahn all the way to Munich and try to slow Patton and his advanced tanks down. Well, I finally got sick and tired of walking and dragging all this ammunition and guns. We never really got into a fight with Patton, because I thank to God, our colonel, who was more or less a real decent fellow, pulled us back all the time. He didn't want to have these young guys like me, about 17 years old. He didn't want to have them slaughtered for nothing. We all knew, he knew, we didn't, but he knew that war was lost. So, but anyway, I got tired of walking at night and fighting in daytime. Fell asleep in the ditch several times at night. And they had some organization, they call it the Werwolf, and I volunteered for it. And you get overrun by the American front line. You get a Panzerfaust, a bicycle, and a machine gun, a little machine pistol, and you have to fight behind the lines and do some nasty things. So that was not my taste neither. I wanted the bicycle and the machine gun. So that night we ran into an American howitzer group, and they had a good time. They had a fire going, and they must have gotten hold of some liquor there, or schnapps, and anyway, they had no guards out there. And my buddy, he wanted to play hero and go in there and shoot the Panzerfaust. It would have killed a few. And I told him, I said, you're a big old idiot, a young idiot. The war is over. Let's save our lives and get the heck out of here before they shoot us. Well, he wanted to play hero. I had him vacuum one, and finally I got away from him and threw the Panzerfaust in a wet ditch, which, you know, you couldn't use it after that no more. I ended up then in the woods, and till I met another German soldier, and he had the bright idea, or told me a lie, something, that you go down in that little village there, and the Americans will write you out a pass, and they send you home. Well, I believed him. I went in that little village, and there was no American. There was a bunch of ex-French POWs which we used for farm labor. But these guys were real nice to me. This is the first time I had a decent meal and a decent bed to sleep in. And so I finally crawled in a nice feather bed, naked. And I felt good. Till in the morning I hear some big old banging at the door and hands up and all kind of commotion. And there came a couple of GIs and opened the door, and here I was naked on the floor there, and they're laughing. I really had to laugh about the situation. It was comical. Well, I let me dress, and then they put me on a tank behind the turret and took me to a prison camp, which was an old cavalry caserne where they, a bunch of horses still had and stables, and at least we had a roof over the head and some straw to sleep on. Well, when I got in there, they had a big old Mexican sarge who was in charge of that camp, and he was saying, hey, anybody speaks English around here? Well, I could speak a little because I wasn't a too good a pupil, and sure, I liked the language, and I read all of Tom Sawyer's and Huckleberry Finn in English, and the Wood, Kipling, the Jungle Book. But my grades in high school, I couldn't brag about them. So, anyway, we got to be friends, and I was his interpreter. And for a while, everything was fine, till all of a sudden they had to move all this camp down to Heilbronn. Now, Heilbronn, they had about 500,000 German prisoners. A big camp with streets and everything in there, but no food. And I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I learned to eat grass which tasted good, and this is no lie. I ate coffee grounds. I tried to get some work going once in a while. They need some cleanup crews and clean out latrines. I did it, and till I finally met my friend and buddy from our high school class, Carl Hotte. And all of a sudden we had a call in there that we are supposed to go to France, we young ones, and work in the coal mine. I told Carl, I said, I'm not going to go there in France and work in the coal mine. So what I did, as American prisoners, we always got plenty of soap. I don't know why we always had plenty of soap. We had hardly any water to wash with, I ate a piece of soap. Well, it was drastic. I ended up in a hospital, and then they fed me beans on top of that. So between the latrine and my little old bed there, I was a constant come and go there for the next 24 hours. Meanwhile, I watched on the street going by, they had several platoons of German prisoners, and they took them to the camp where they discharge camp. And but they had Hawaiian guards on them. That's the first time I heard the pineapple soldiers, no offense. Anyway, if I watched them, I got behind the last one and the next bunch, and the guy was counting there, and he counted 3 times, and he always had one too many. He finally gave up, said, to heck with it, get in there, So I came in the camp to where they discharged you, and we had to go in front of a captain who we had to tell him his whole life, my whole life story and everything. Where he said, finally, you get over there in this other camp, and in about 4 weeks you can go home. Well, that was another big mistake, because meanwhile they changed the armies, and another army took over the camp, and they forgot about us. So I ended another couple of months in camp. Meanwhile, I met met a man in there that became my close friend, and believe me, friends, I was devastated, morally devastated, because all my dreams just went out the window in a big puff. Germany was destroyed. Food was very, very scarce. I had no clothing. I had a pair of little shorts and an old raincoat. And so I asked Eric, I asked Eric, what in the world I'm going to do now? Everything, my whole future is shut. And he looked at me and said, you're an idiot. I said, look around you. Whole Germany is destroyed. Learn to trade as a bricklayer. Learn to trade as a carpenter. We need young men who rebuild Germany. Well, I followed his advice. They discharged me finally, and I had to walk about 50 miles before I got to my hometown. I was a sad figure there, really. And so, of course, I got sick for another week. I still think I was working on that soap there. Anyway, I signed up as a bricklayer apprentice boy and got I'm certified to be a bricklayer after 3 years. And I worked in Germany as a bricklayer and concrete finisher, but in wintertime when I couldn't work, I went to the engineering school. Now they got two different engineers. I was in that field engineering school where they needed only 4 semesters to be a field engineer. So while I was unemployed in wintertime, I got my engineering degree. And things were looking up then. I had a motorcycle, we had decent food to eat, and my mother and I, we had a nice little apartment there. Till my uncle in Houston, he got her brother, my uncle, and he got a wild idea that since my parents divorced, he wanted my mother coming over to Houston and live with him and his wife. So she did, and I was stuck with all the inheritance from her. I still got the piano over here. It's about over 100-year-old piano, and china and silver and stuff. And now what I'm going to do with that stuff here, you know? So I thought, I stored it. And I finally went. I got on the Dutch freighter. It took me 3 weeks to get to Houston, seasick. And I had already a job waiting for me. My sister worked for the big construction company, and they needed an engineer in concrete. So I had 1 day to rest, and the second day I had to go to work in Galveston to build a bridge to Pellegren Island. And really and truly, it was a completely different world for me, you know, here at Galveston, and I had a labor force was black, I had Mexicans, then the white labor force resented me as a boss, because I was, you know, after all, a dumb crowd, you know. Yeah, we got along, but still there was a lot of resentment in there, till we finally, one Saturday, we had a nice party over in one of the Galveston bars. We all got high and drunk and became friends. And
was a big thing with costumes and a very expensive show. They decided to pick 3 of Jerome Kern's operettas. The first operetta was Music in the Air, and that was set in the Alps, so we had beautiful Tyrolean costumes. From that, the medley led into the Roberta segment, and you know how beautiful those gowns were, and the men were wearing tuxedos. The third segment was Showboat, and what could be prettier than the beautiful antebellum costumes, hoop skirts, the men were costumed, hats, everything. But imagine what a problem we had getting all this gear to the South Pacific. We had many, many trunks, and all this was stored very, very carefully as to not damage what we were taking with us. Many, many shoes. If you can imagine ballerinas who wear out their shoes after a few performances, how many ballerina slippers we had to pack. The show consisted of 18 members. We had 4 instrumentalists playing, the conductor played the piano, we had a sax, a trumpet, and a drummer. But that segment also carried extra orchestrations and instruments, because when we got to the islands, word would get to them that if there were any musicians, they were welcome to rehearse and sit in with us for the performance. So we pretty much had full orchestras all the time. We had 2 lead singers, male and female, 4 chorus singers, 5 ballerinas, 2 comedians, and 1 modern tap dancer. Now, they didn't belong in the type of music we were doing, but in order for us to make our costume changes, something had to be going on stage, and these people were the fill-ins. We had 6 weeks of rehearsal, and also at that time, our costumes were being made for us. And before we went overseas, we played some camps in New Jersey and Marine camps in North Carolina as dress rehearsals, and if there were to be any changes, that was the time to do it. But the show went over beautifully. It just stayed the way we had it set up. We arrived in Oahu, and when we got there, we were sponsored by the Navy, and they gave us a good-looking young naval officer to really escort our shows. He was involved with setting the dates, the bookings. He had to arrange for transportation to get us to and from the shows. He was in charge of any parties that were set up after the performance. Always there was something to do after the show. And escort us back to the hotel, make sure we got there, because next day we had the same thing. The show was well received, and word got around about this fabulous show. And when we got to an island, we would usually get there in the afternoon, and we would see many, many young soldiers just standing in line in the hot sun, giving up their dinner so they could have a good seat for the show. So we were expected, it was all advertised, and they knew what we were about, and they really did enjoy the show. Now, we were under contract that we had to eat with the enlisted men and talk to them. If they knew where we were all from. I'm from Massachusetts, and I had many boys from that state talk to me afterwards. We didn't talk about ourselves. We talked to them, asking questions and telling them, hoping that they could come talk to us and get rid of this tension that they had. We did the Marianas and the Gilbert Islands after we did Maui and Honolulu, and got as far as Guam. The morale was low, but not as bad as what I saw on Wake Island. When we got there, they hadn't cleaned up anything. There were ships along the beaches that were half sunk, There were Jap Zeros that had crashed, and the pillboxes were still visible. But we had to sleep in Quonset huts. If we got to a camp and there were too many soldiers for the seating capacity of the theater, and pretty much they were outdoor theaters, we did 2 or 3 shows. We stayed there, so they always accommodated us in Quonset huts. We had our own plane, and the way the luggage was set up with our costumes was really a very strict order, because we had to make sure the plane was balanced. And we had, I have photo album here, and I have some pictures that were taken on stage if you're interested. And it was really a great experience for us. We did the best we could. The hardest thing was when we had a Red Cross dance. A dance meant that these boys got a chance to dance. We were only 9 girls in the show, and there were thousands of servicemen. So they all stood in line. They had 30 seconds. Each one only had 30 seconds. So we would, they only played fast music. They didn't have any slow dancing. You would do your few little steps. Your partner would throw you out. When you came back, you had another partner. But think how hard that was for us. We had already done a show, and here we are dancing straight for 2 or 3 hours so we could accommodate all the enlisted men that were at the show. I enjoyed the experience. We learned a lot. As a professional, you learned how to handle yourself under adverse conditions. But there was something very special for me, because that young naval officer that I told you about, on May 19th, we celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Angela. And knowing that there was a lot of Marines during that time, I hope they were well behaved. And being a Marine who travels a lot, one of the things is the USO. I take advantage of it during a lot of my opportunities over long layovers or delays with weather and different things. And they're always there to provide a hot cup of coffee, a soda, a glass of water, a pastry, something to eat, and always a friendly smile, which is the most important thing when you're traveling away from home. So thank you again, Angela, for you and what the USO does for the service members of this country. Thank you. And one of the things I was hoping for, that we'd have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we have about 15 minutes. So what I'd like to do is hot the mic up over there. And if anybody has a question, the gentleman in the white will have the mic, and you can go to him if you like, and he'll come up there and ask your question of our panelists. Just come on up, don't be shy.
First of all, thank you for all your time and joining us here. You've all had wonderful presentations, and it's just a shame we have to go back home tomorrow and not listen to a little more. In my particular case, it's an unusual question, but a lot of the things that are shown with the media of the era, a lot of the movies that depict what was going on, the life that was going on, I asked one of the veterans on the panel this previously, but how much was the culture of smoking embedded in America following World War II?
Anybody want to jump on that?
What was what?
The question was, the cigarette companies and manufacturers wanted to provide products to servicemen, and obviously they gave them out free.
Well, that was well, we got C-stores, and actually a carton of cigarettes cost us 30 cents a carton after we got out at sea. So most of the sailors aboard my ship, I would say over better than 50% smoked. Okay?
As a follow-up to that, I was just curious, did the smoking increase after the war, or was it something that was already going on beforehand? I don't work for a
Well,
lawyer, by the way, so
I
everybody
don't
know that.
I don't know that it increased or decreased, but I'm sure that all the GIs and all the sailors and soldiers and Marines all smoked at one time practically. I don't think there were too many that didn't.
Thank you.
It was
I wanted to say something too. I was in the barracks with a bunch of women, and they were giving out free cigarettes, and everybody was sampling them, but nobody picked up the smoking habit from it.
That's good.
Thank you all for coming to our city for this wonderful occasion. Mrs. Hoffman, how did you meet your husband and get to Louisiana? Because I have a lady Marine who met a man in the Marines and went to Ohio to live. So now you're from Wisconsin and lived in New Orleans.
Well, the young naval officer was a...
Mrs. Hoffman.
Oh, Mrs. Hoffman.
How did I
Mrs.
meet my
Hoffman,
husband?
You were the lady Marine. Met your husband and you live in New Orleans now?
My husband is deceased.
You met him and came to New Orleans to live?
Yes.
Where did you meet your husband? What city?
I met him socially.
In the city?
No, in a social affair, but I met him and he left the country almost immediately. He was he went to Germany for about a year after we met, but we did keep in touch with each other. And the same...
He was a Louisianian?
Yes, he was from New Orleans.
Okay.
Brainwashed me totally.
Well, I was just curious because my lady Marine was at Camp Lejeune. She was one of the first officers there. Were
What's
you in
her
company?
name? What is her name?
Lieutenant Manett, M-A-N-I-N-T. She was in Company A. Were you in Company A at Lejeune?
I
Anyway,
don't know her.
she met her Marine in Paris Island, and he went overseas. And when they came back, she married him and moved to Ohio. So he is a Louisiana in Ohio and a Wisconsin in Louisiana. But thank you anyway.
Yeah.
I'd like to show you this after the...
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
This question's for Don. Don, in recent years there's been some visits by Japanese aviators and folks to Pearl Harbor, and I was wondering if you ever took part in any of those things and what your feelings are. The Japanese we're coming up to the 65th anniversary of Pearl Harbor in a couple of weeks. If you still, any thoughts on that, and do you harbor resentment about what happened, and if you could talk about how you kind of, I know you said you were badly burned after the attack, and if you could kind of talk about your rehabilitation and your feelings about the Japanese even today.
Well, that's quite a subject with me, and of course I have my own opinion, and I don't try to force it on anybody else, but I don't sit by them. I don't have any animosity against them. They were doing a job just like we were. But I don't sit next to them. I don't shake their hands. I don't associate with them at all. And I'm sure that the 1,000 men that are still aboard that ship, my ship, would not shake hands with them, being they took away 65 years of their life. So that's my opinion.
What about the second part of that, Don, your rehabilitation on your burns?
Well, the burns, I've had quite a few. I've had skin grafts on my legs, on my back, on my arms. They, of course, didn't have anything for burns at that time, and burns always get infected, you know. But was in Mare Island in the hospital, and they would double sheet us, and then they'd have 4 corpsmen on each one on a corner, and they'd pick us up and set us in a tub of salt water, and that seemed to help. First time wasn't too good, but after that we kind of looked forward to it, and after a lot of healing and a lot of getting well, and I can remember being able to roll over to the side of the bed and stand up. They weighed me. I weighed 92 pounds.
Thank you, Don.
I'm a college student in North Carolina, and I came down here for this conference, and I just want to tell all the veterans here, it's truly been an honor to be able to hear all of their stories, and it's really been a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing to be able to hear so many eclectic tales of what people did during the war. And I was wondering, there's a lot of veterans that are very reluctant to come out and tell their story, and I wonder what made you people want to come out and share your experiences with us?
Besides me forcing them, right? Okay. Hey, Angela, you want to start? We can finish up with that. Why you got involved with the USO to support these Marines and sailors, Army, et cetera, overseas?
Well, I was 23 years old at the time, finished with my music, my singing, your lessons, your coaching, and it was time for me to begin a career. So I was told that they were auditioning at the USO, and I went there with my music. They always ask you to bring the music, but it wasn't an audition. It was a performance. The way they choose their talent is you sing for enlisted men, and if they like you, you're in. You're in. And I had gone there, and we did the rehearsing, and you're only allowed to do 2 songs, and I did rehearse with a very accomplished pianist, and he said, he took me aside and he held up a piece of my music, and he said, see this? We're not going to rehearse it, but have it ready for an encore. And at 10 o'clock the next day, Sam Harris called me from USO and said, I want to see you, bring your music. And I did, and he told me that they were casting this fantastic show, and they needed a coloratura, someone who could do all the obligato work. And I went again and auditioned for the director of the Jerome Kern show, and after 8 bars, he said, he picked a piece of music, I did it, after 8 bars, he said, stop, that's enough. So I was sure he wasn't interested. And he said, go back to Jack Harris, sign your contract, rehearsals begin at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And that's how you audition for the USO.
Anybody else?
Well, it's not the idea that I want to tell the story because I'm no hero. As far as I'm concerned, all the heroes are still aboard my ship, and all the other people have made their supreme sacrifice. But I want to keep this in front of the public because, you know, this could happen again. And if we don't take note and be on the alert, everybody has to take part. And we have to keep it in front of the public.
I guess I should voice an opinion on the subject. What motivated me to consider the Marine Corps and military service was my generation was in the war for 2 years, from 1941 to 1943, and my contemporaries were dying and in the war. So many women joined the Army and the Navy, and then when I saw the Marine Corps had an opening, I decided it was my turn to do something for my country.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity. That's why it's important to bring folks like you and everybody that's been here this weekend to continue to tell these stories, which is a nice segue into my next point, and try to give you guys a couple minutes to come up here for those who are going to the dinner, etc. I mentioned earlier Dana Deasy, who we met on my left. At this time, I want to talk about a young man real quickly that I met again yesterday, and I've noticed him over the last couple of days here at the conference. He's been memorized by the panelists. He usually sits near or in the front row. And I asked him what brings him to Memory Hall and to the world of history to listen to the stories. And he had told me he's seen a couple of the war movies. He's recently seen Flags of Our Fathers, Band of Brothers, which a big highlight of his weekend is meeting Don Malarkey. He's also met Dr. Lynn Ashley and a lot of the veterans here, and when you look at him, he smiles brimmingly. The thing about it is, you know, I asked him too, he says, well, they're funny. And he sees them, and for whatever reason, he's attracted to them. He's attracted to their stories. Because the veterans, they go out. They want to continue to tell the story, and it's about not just telling the story to us, but to the youth, because the youth of this country is the one, and the other countries that are going to carry on these stories to make sure they're not forgotten, and they're not stuck somewhere where people aren't going to continue. That's why we need to do these things. This conference is so important. And if Nate Beach would stand up, Nate. Thank you so much, Nate. And Nate, for those in the back, he's 8 years old. So thank you a lot, Nate. Winston Churchill said, "Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." There are other veterans in the audience. If they would stand up, I'd appreciate it. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would please join me in thanking the few. Thank you very much.
Really free, but it will be free as long as we're the home of the brave.